or good morning to anybody who's here. I'm sometimes quite curious about how people that knew me before I became a Christian, how they view me and what they think of what they presume to be my ideas. But I would say that they're biblical ideas, really, that they're not things that I've thought of. My perception of reality is quite different from theirs, or so it would seem. But, the beginning of understanding is the fear of the Lord. So I'm sorry to say that anybody who doesn't fear the Lord doesn't qualify for any degree of advancement in the field of understanding. That's what the Bible says, and I believe that to be true. Because to investigate a matter, you have to stand on a principle. It's a philosophical axiom almost. We see the world subjectively, so we have to know our vantage point. If you were mountaineering or something, you couldn't know where you were until you checked your coordinates and the very rock upon which you are standing. And the heathen can't do that. The heathen ultimately has to revert to some ritualistic interpretation of reality, and ultimately mindless repetition of the name of Diana, the god. Because they don't do that now, they're more sophisticated, but ultimately the principles upon which their investigation stands, whether you could define it as science or personal conviction sometimes. I've heard people argue for that. My New Age friend often used to say that he knew things because he felt them inside. And he always placed his hand over his sternum when he was making those kinds of assertions. I think it was involved with chakras in his case. But, my humanist friend wouldn't do that. They don't believe in any of that stuff. But nonetheless, they would have to tie their warp to some kind of a stanchion or a bollard, some place. Otherwise, your orientation is going to be off. Perhaps the boat is turning and the stars appear to be moving. Perhaps it's tossing and you can't gauge the angles. You have to be like a kind of theodolite almost. And the only stable point is Christ. That's the surprising thing that you come to realize after a while. And that's why in the Bible, that's kind of the rock. And upon this rock will I build my church. There's nowhere else to place your feet. So, I suppose I'm viewed as being a very naughty person for holding the ideas that I apparently have devised. But I'm just following the Bible, really. That's the issue with polygyny, which I'm very interested in. I think this is a very important aspect of our faith. As we men regain our status in the world, because everything has been contrived against men ultimately. We are the ones that can seize power. We are the ones that are the opponents of our oppressors. And so everything has been done to dethrone us, particularly through our women, of course, by taking our authority over our own women and handing it to them so that they would have authority over us, as has been the case for rather a long time. They exercise their authority through the legal system. They will cause a man to be thrust into poverty if he doesn't comply with the supremacy of the woman. And then they have diverted our attention from women by providing us with hermaphroditish idols on the movie screens. It's astonishing once you begin to understand it and see it. Most of the shows that I watch on television, I just don't see any women in them at all. I see men dressed as women. And they've persuaded us to lust after these creatures. Everything that's against God's plan, that they have done, inverting creation entirely. But it's being revealed at the moment, and this is going to be a tidal wave, an unstoppable process, actually. People have referred to the noticing. I quite like that. We're noticing stuff. The extent to which we've been abused and misused, we are the people. We're not even allowed to hold a weapon to defend ourselves. It's been removed from our hands, except in America, with some limitations. In this country, the removal really followed the Dunblane massacre, which Rupert is accused of mentioning incorrectly on his Joe Rogan podcast. And that was followed a month later in Australia by the Port Arthur massacre, which produced the same effect in Australia as had Dunblane in Britain. And we surrendered all our weapons to agents of the state. Needless to say, both of those events start to reveal some very interesting details when you pull them apart, which you're dissuaded from doing. The records for Dunblane were sealed for 100 years after the case. The immediate witnesses, rather than attending counselling as you would probably have imagined, apparently had to undergo debriefing, a military expression. I don't know. But, when you just have to look at what happened and what the result was, whether Rupert was deliberately drawing attention to that, or whether it's just had to come up because everything is being revealed now. But, we need our right to bear arms. We need all our rights back. To behave in the world as men, as honest men. To do justice. They've all been taken from us by wicked usurpers. So it is. What can a man say? I have a problem this morning because one of my patent translations has been challenged illegally. And so I'm on the hook. I haven't looked at the complaints yet. But it's a risk that you run, certainly in the field of patent, because patents, the author is innovating, because that is the reason for the patent. But at the same time, he must be conservative to ensure that the patent can be brought to bear legally. It's a very tricky field, and disputes with patent offices are not unheard of. Not enough care is taken. Hopefully I was careful myself, but I might not have been. I'm far from perfect, and these are difficult subjects, so I'm a little bit concerned. But language is very dangerous stuff, And speaking of language, of course, it was Archbishop Cranmer that removed biblical polygyny as a reasonable expectation of a man, that he could have a second or a third or a fourth wife if he were able to afford it. Because in the wicked, I believe, Book of Common Prayer, he inserted the expression forsaking all others as part of the marriage vows required of also the husband, whereas previously, if that were there, it would have only been of the wife, forsaking all others. It's not required of the husband, and the Bible shows it quite clearly. And it's been part of our oppression. That's why we don't have any women. That's why we haven't. The streets are empty. They're flooded with Muslim children. Of course, Muslims do indeed practice polygyny. Not all of them, but not all of our people did it, or would do it, or would be able to afford it, or would be inclined. But it's certainly entirely biblical and really to be desired at the moment, because we need to repopulate. We need to have a full quiver, all of we men. And yet it's been removed from us by the enemy. The Book of Common Prayer was quite similar to the wording in the King James Bible in many places. But it was the preacher in the old church that warned me that it wasn't the same, and it isn't. That's the trouble. You can't just take bits of the Bible and then start missing things out. This is really wickedness. You can't add to the word, or you can't take from the word. Well, really when you're doing that, you're taking from the word. The Bible is like what was it called? The vesture of Christ. It can't be cut and divided. Even quoting a single biblical verse is dangerous because everything is fitted together and must be considered, verse against verse, line by line, as it were, here a little, there a little. So Cranmer wasn't ultimately a faithful man. Well, he wouldn't have been a bishop in the 1600s, I suppose, if he were a true believer. I think the true believers by that time were to be found only in the Scottish Highlands, perhaps. Men of great faith. Mainly there, who'd not submitted to the rule of the increasingly wicked kings. God bless this day.